It allows for innovation, yeah. I mean, if you said it as if you said, oh, we're really good at this, and today the best way possible to do it is, and you name some way, you're absolutely right. In 10 years' time, it would be very stale. And so it does allow innovation. How does it expand the market? Which market? The emissions control market, right? Okay, so much the same answer as he gave from another point of view. He says, well, if we wait over time, then there'll be better stuff. And you said, hey, wait a minute, there's other guys who want to market emissions control stuff, and you're closing them out. Why are you doing that? But why is it good that you don't close them out? So, and efficient means, in this case, what happens to cost? Yeah. So the big deal here, in the short run, is just cost. Remember the picture. There's isoquants, so there can be points off the isoquants. And so who's going to have the incentives to get the lowest cost way of doing the job? The manufacturer. So if you really want the job done, and you're willing to supervise them, they don't lie to you. And they will lie if you don't supervise them. That's a promise. Right? If you're willing to do the supervision, then letting them find the lowest cost way to do the job will give you the lowest cost. And in a couple of weeks, you'll see that that will mean that the cost to you of the car will be less. So you want them to pick the lowest cost way, and you want them to innovate. You don't want them to be stuck. So that's why we do effluent standards, not technology standards. Now, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act have as central parts technology-based effluent standards. You've got to get all the words in. The first two words are technology-based. The last two words are effluent standards. So at the end of the process, it's an effluent standard. So many grams per mile. You saw it, right? You saw the ones for cars. We can go back just to be real clear. These are effluent standards. It is 3.4 grams of carbon monoxide per mile, I think, as it's written. That seems too much, but that's what I read, right? That's the standard. So that's the effluent standard part. That's what the manufacturer must do. The technology-based part is how the regulator got to that number. The way the regulator gets to that number is first the regulator, and that's not up on the board, first thing the regulator does realizes there's a public health problem, and it needs to have less carbon monoxide. And it does health studies. In the case of carbon monoxide, there are very convincing health studies that show reasonably small amounts of carbon monoxide have very measurable effects on people, and not good ones. Right? So that part we don't talk about. So the regulator now knows, I got to get less carbon monoxide. Now we come to the story. The first thing the regulator does, he's thinking about, or she's thinking about cars, is to ask, how would I do it? What piece of technology can I put on a car? Or what screw can I turn on the car's engine to change how the gasoline burns to get out less carbon monoxide? And they make a list of those things. Those are technologies. I don't know what you do for carbon monoxide. For NOx, I know catalytic converters are a good answer. Right? So you make a list of these technologies. But for NOx, another answer is Honda had an engine technology in which the fuel and the air was mixed and swirled, and therefore they got a little bit better combustion, and that allowed them to downsize their catalytic converter, holding NOx constant, which is, of course, what you want. You don't want to go wandering around with a lot of precious metals glued under your car. Right? So that's a good thing. Right? So you find these technologies. And then based on the technologies you find, technology-based effluent standard, you say, if they did a catalytic converter, they could reach 0.34 grams. Therefore, I will assign them an effluent standard of 0.34 grams. So the technology base is the regulator is forced to figure out how it could be done. Based on the fact that there is a way to do it, they are then entitled to make the manufacturer not do the technology, but achieve the savings in pollution that the technology would get. So it's an effluent standard, and it's based on a known, usually known technology that the regulator has found. That's the idea of technology-based effluent standards. And they go for the greenhouse gas standards in California, the regular pollution standards in California, the new source performance standards for clean air, and eventually we'll talk about the Clean Air Act properly. I've been putting it off. And the discharge permits for water. They're all based on this technology-based effluent standard concept. So it's absolutely key to understanding American laws as they exist. Yeah. They're forced to figure out how it can be done. So if I want to reduce carbon monoxide to 0.34, I got to figure out how to do that on an automobile. Once I figure out how to do that, I can make up posters, basically, that have pictures of these technologies on them. And quite literally, we have a hearing before the California Air Resources Board, and I've been at many, and the engineers show up with these posters. And they say, see, if you put that thing on the car, then it would not pollute more than 0.34. And then the other side comes and says, but that thing costs infinity, and it only works on Tuesday. And the engineers say, and you're a bunch of liars, as we all knew, because here's one of your own studies we dug out, blah, blah, blah. It goes back and forth. And then the board has to find, as a matter of fact, this thing is some kind of reasonable cost, and there's different alphabet numbers for that. It's not my problem. And it's going to do the job. Right? So you're having essentially a mini trial on whether one of the famous ones, whether a 6-speed transmission would save 12% of greenhouse gases in cars. Automobile manufacturers say, no! ARB and its consultants say, yes! And the Air Resources Board hears the evidence and says, yes. That's how those things go down. Here's the same thing in a picture. Here's the picture from before. Remember, I've got clean air going this way. I've got other stuff going this way. I keep my price of 2 for a little while. I'll go back to 1, don't worry. And here's the tangency. And I want to stop them from polluting so much. I don't want to use so many clean air services. So what does the regulator do? The regulator finds a technique that will make the same output as on the blue. It's not necessarily an efficient technique. Why would it be that the California Air Resources Board, with a couple of consultants and maybe 1 or 2 automotive engineers, will not find as good a way to make cars as General Motors? Does that seem reasonable to you? So why? Well, you're laughing, but why? Why are they going to do a better job of this than we are? You want to be an engineer, right? You know, if you got a chance to design cars for General Motors or sit at the Air Resources Board, and General Motors will pay you 3 times as much and give you 4 times as interesting problems, where are you going? We're testing her public spiritedness. She's going to GM. We can see by her smile, right? And so that's the truth of the matter, is we do get some good engineers, but they will get really good engineers who will spend their entire lives in car world. Our guys and gals will go from car world to paint world to goodness knows what's next. So the real experts actually do live in the firms. So you can expect that if our experts have an idea, we don't have the best idea. We have a feasible idea. I've drawn it above the Issaquah. It is inefficient the way I drew it. If we were lucky, it would be down here and it would be efficient. But I think in general, from what I'm told, our suggestions do the job, but they're inefficient. So if we came up with that technology where the red star is, and that technology made the same as on the Issaquah, we would then be entitled to say to the manufacturer, you can make this any way you want, but you may use at most 20 units of clean air services. Equivalently, you may at most put out 0.34 grams of NOx per mile. Yep. That's the story I just told, an Issaquah diagram. And now you can go a little further with that. Yeah, this does the same thing. We'll leave it up for a second. Why this way? Regulator knows it can be done. Yeah, that works. Regulator has an upper bound on cost. They know a way of doing it. They know what that costs. And regulators are assured of cleaning the air. And it works from the regulator's point of view. You're not asking to do something that's infinitely costly because you have the thing in your hand. You know the thing works, right? And you know it'll clean up the air. But let's look at this again. So if you had, well, let's go back for my pen. Okay. This is what is least cost. Agreed? That's the tangency. But you're allowed to do that anymore? No, because you have an effluent permit, right? And that forces you to be somewhere this way. Well, let's look. How about that point? That point's on the Issaquah, agreed? So it does do the job. That point's legal. And what does that point cost? Well, I can find out what that point costs very easily. If I draw a parallel line, it's a new Issaquah line that's parallel, right? It'll have the same prices. And then I can simply go up there, find that that hits at 90, close enough. Remember, the price over here is 2, and so the cost of this point is 180. And that's what it says up there. And so the least cost way is 180. You can check out other points up here, but as you can see, since this goes up, the cost will go up as you go that way. So now I know the least cost way is 180. But what about the thing that I thought of, my engineers thought of? It's here at 20 and 80, and if you multiply it out, its cost is 240. So what has the manufacturer done in this story? The regulator said, I know this technique. It works. The manufacturer said, but you're not telling me to do that. You're just telling me to live somewhere on this side with 20 or less units of air. What's the least cost way for me to do that? Right here. It's not tangent anymore. Why is it not tangent? Because I can't come this way. This is a corner condition. Remember your calculus? Remember the trick questions in calculus where they give you some nice, I'm going to draw it on the board. So they give you some nice function like this, and they say, where is it maximized? And they know that most of you are going to do f prime equals 0 here, and then they're going to get to say, wrong. Why? Because of that. Why does that work? That works because you can't go this way. If you could go this way, presumably you wouldn't stop here. You'd go for negative numbers to get higher on the function, but you can't. That's exactly what's going on there. The reason why you don't get a tangency or a place where some derivative vanishes is you're on the edge of the space. You want to go this way, but they won't allow you. You can tell you want to go this way. Look, if you could go this way, your cost would fall down to here. They're just not going to let you. So that's the best you can do. And that is better than the red star up top, which is the test technology. That's the story of the technology-based effluent standard. Now, these things had a backdoor to economics. The backdoor to economics was in the alphabet soup. Top alphabet soup is best practicable technology. And it gives you some of the dates. And it means technology at a reasonable price. But then they decided they didn't want the price to be reasonable anymore. They wanted to have a tougher standard. And so they choose a new alphabet, best available technology. And that means any technology. But in practice, there really is some limitation by cost, because the regulator doesn't want to impose something that's impossible. So that's the alphabet soup. If you want to do environmental law, you'd be able to tell me lots about this alphabet soup. But being an economist, I can only tell you it's alphabet soup. And it's their backdoor to economics. It's their code words for how expensive the technology could be, and the switch there is their code words for the technology is allowed to be more expensive than it used to be. If you want to read something, this would be a good time to read chapter 8 in the text. It's really a research paper of my friend and co-author Gloria's, which I, at great length, turned into a set of diagrams and discussion at exactly the level we have been discussing it. And if you love this sort of thing, I can give you MATLAB code for it, and you can go play with it. No one's ever taken me up on that offer yet. All right, I'd like to do a simple exercise. This exercise is too simple. The exercise is this. Let's say the output is simply proportional to a single input, right? And the single input costs W per unit. I want to know what the cost function is that goes along with this. And this is a very simple example, so you can do it. The first thing you have to do is find out how much X you need to make Q. You have a formula up there, so I'll give you all 1 minute, and that's what it should take you. I want to find X as a function of Q. Look at the top. Don't think too hard. And write down what is X as a function of Q. You're thinking too hard. There's no thinking here. There should be no thinking at all. You have a formula. I want X on one side, Q on the other. Okay, I presume now you have it, yes? Because there isn't any thinking here. You know, what have you found? You have found the factor demand, how much of X I will buy as a function of how much input I will buy as a function of how much output I will make. More generally, the solution to a problem like that would have the price of the factors in it. And what's simple about one factor is there's only one answer. Now let's go back to something you all know. How many of you have siblings? How many of you have a sibling of the opposite sex and not one of your own sex? How many times have you been told that your They're your parents' favorite boy or girl, whichever you are. Yeah, a lot of times, okay. Because you're the only one. You're also the least favorite one, the most favorite one, and everything in between. Well, how many ways are there to make the output? So what is the least cost way? What's the most cost way? That way, all right? That's why this is a simple example. That's why the tangency has gone away, right? So we created an example that's too simple. So now we know the least cost way of making Q, but what's C of Q? You can take it the next step pretty easily. For any output Q, how much input X do you need? Q divided by K. And what does a unit of input cost? W. So WQ over K is the cost function. So now you've done the whole exercise and you have a cost function in front of you. Why is that too simple? It's too simple because with two inputs, you have to do some sort of calculus to find that tangency. That makes it harder. With one input, it's not a problem. We have fancy words for this. Prices of inputs were W before they turned into P. So if you're taking notes, you probably want to make that P a W to keep it consistent. So this object, how much input I buy as a function of output and input prices, that's what you just found. And when you find the tangencies, that's what you're finding. Okay. So this is your standard diagram, right? You could change the prices, and you'd find here, let me draw it this way. Here's two different price lines. If I do this right, I can be tangent up here. You can't see. One tangency, two tangencies with different prices. I get the idea across even if the diagram is less than wonderful. Right. And as I change the prices, what happens? I change the amount of X1 I'm buying. Output constant. That tells you immediately a way to save air pollution. One of my inputs is clean air services, so what would I do if I wanted people to use less of it, other than tell them they had to use less of it? What could I do? What happens here? Go from here to there. What did I do to get from here to there? And how do you raise prices? You're the government. You tax them, right? So if you tax them, you figured out that a tax on effluent is going to make them produce differently. So again, we have the same duality we had before. We can make them do something. You must use less clean air services, technology-based effluent standards, and that will get us whatever level of effluent per output we're looking for. Or we could change the prices on them by taxing it, and that will also do it. So we have an assumption which I hide. My assumption is that it's not free to get rid of waste gases. Right? So if it were free, then I would have strange diagrams, because then without a tax, the price lines would be horizontal, and I draw my isoquants downward sloping, and they just never have tangencies. So I assume it always takes some work to get the waste gas out of your plant. And so long as I'm willing to assume that, then there's always some price for clean air services. And that keeps me in a very standard kind of economics. I don't have to make any assumptions different from what you find in every other textbook. So that's what I've done. I've assumed getting rid of waste product, although it may cost a small amount, doesn't cost zero. I think that's reasonable. So let's go back, and it has air as a function of price. So here was my original. And then I wanted to restrict them. Here I've restricted them to 16. I want to get them back here to 16 units of air. And so I drew a tangency. And I'll draw it, and then maybe I'll go to the board and draw it. So once upon a time, the regulator appeared, and this is what the regulator found. And this was 24 units of air. And the regulator was unhappy because people were going in unison, right? And therefore, the regulator wanted this firm, and many firms like it, to pollute less. That is to say, use less clean air services. For whatever reasons, the regulator decided cutting back to 16 would be okay. And so this point is this point here. Then he wanted to know, well, if I didn't want to just tell them they have to do that, I wanted to do it by taxing them. How would I do that? Well, you want to create a tangency here at 16. So what you're going to do, you're going to take a straight edge. Let's find something that looks like a straight edge. Right. You can take a straight edge. You can't, I can do it on the board, right? This is the point I want. I want a tangency at that point. So I just mechanically line up my straight edge to be tangent. And I draw on the line, and that gives you the green line. And there's no other way for you to do it. If I gave you the algebraic description of all these things, obviously you could work it out as a calculus problem. But that's not what you're going to do. You're going to take a straight edge, and you're going to draw it in. Once you draw it in, you can figure out everything. So here the price of other stuff remains too. So what is the price? Let's find some of the prices. What's the price of this point? It's the same as the price of that point. That looks to be about 75.